Sahih al-Bukhari 1051. Narrated Abdullah bin Amr.
When the sun eclipsed in the lifetime of Allah's Messenger, and an announcement was made that the prayer was to be held in congregation,
the Prophet performed 2 bowing in 1 rak'ah.
Then he stood up and performed 2 bowing in 1 rak'ah.
Then he sat down and finished the prayer,
and by then the eclipse had cleared. Aisha said, I had never performed such a long prostration.
Sahih al-Bukhari 1052. Narrated Abdullah bin Abbas.
The sun eclipsed in the lifetime of the Prophet, p.b.u.h.
Allah's Messenger offered the eclipse prayer and stood for a long period equal to the period in which one could recite Surat al-Baqarah.
Then he bowed for a long time and then stood up for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing, then bowed again for a long time but for a shorter period than the first, then he prostrated twice and then stood up for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing, then he bowed for a long time which was shorter than the previous one, and then he raised his head and stood up for a long period which was shorter than the first standing, then he bowed for a long time which was shorter than the first bowing, and then prostrated twice and finished the prayer. By then, the sun, eclipse, had cleared. The Prophet then said, the sun and the moon are 2 of the signs of Allah.
They eclipse neither because of the death of somebody nor because of his life, i.e. birth.
So when you see them, remember Allah.
The people say, O Allah's Messenger,
we saw you taking something from your place and then we saw you retreating. The Prophet replied, I saw paradise and stretched my hands towards a bunch of its fruits, and had I taken it, you would have eaten from it as long as the world remains. I also saw the hellfire and I had never seen such a horrible sight. I saw that most of the inhabitants were women.
The people asked, O Allah's Messenger, why is it so?
The Prophet replied, because of their ungratefulness. It was asked whether they are ungrateful to Allah. The Prophet said, they are ungrateful to their companions of life, husbands, and ungrateful to good deeds. If you are benevolent to one of them throughout the life and if she sees anything undesirable in you, she will say, I have never had any good from you.
Sahih al-Bukhari 1053. Narrated Fatima bint al-Mundhir.
Asma bint al-Bakr said, I came to Aisha the wife of the Prophet, p.b.u.h, during the solar eclipse.
The people were standing and offering the prayer and she was also praying too. I asked her, what has happened to the people?
She pointed out with her hand towards the sky and said, Subhanallah.
I said, is there a sign? She pointed out in the affirmative.
Asma further said, I too then stood up for the prayer till I fainted and then poured water on my head. When Allah's Messenger had finished his prayer, he thanked and praised Allah and said, I have seen at this place of mine what I had never seen, even paradise and hell. No doubt, it has been inspired to me that you will be put to trial in the graves like or nearly like the trial of Masih ad-Dajjal.
I do not know which one of the 2 Asma said.
The angels will come to every one of you and will ask, what do you know about this man, i.e. Muhammad? The believer or a firm believer, I do not know which word Asma said, will reply, he is Muhammad, Allah's Messenger, p.b.u.h, who came to us with clear evidences and guidance, so we accepted his teachings, believed and followed him. The angels will then say to him, sleep peacefully, as we knew surely that you were a firm believer. The hypocrite or doubtful person, I do not know which word Asma said, will say, I do not know. I heard the people saying something so I said it, the same.
Sahih al-Bukhari 1054. Narrated Asma.
No doubt the Prophet ordered people to manumit slaves during the solar eclipse.
Sahih al-Bukhari 1055-1056. Narrated Amra bint Abdurrahman.
A Jewess came to Aisha to ask her about something and then she said, may Allah give you refuge from the punishment of the grave.
So Aisha asked Allah's Messenger, would the people be punished in their graves?
Allah's Messenger asked Allah's refuge from the punishment of the grave, indicating an affirmative reply. Then one day Allah's Messenger rode to leave for some place, but the sun eclipsed. He returned on the forenoon and passed through the rear of the dwellings of his wives, and stood up and started offering the eclipse prayer, and the people stood behind him. He stood for a long period and then performed a long bowing and then stood straight for a long period which was shorter than that of the first standing, Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first bowing, then he raised his head and prostrated for a long time and then stood up, for the second rak'ah, for a long while, but the standing was shorter than the standing of the first rak'ah. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than that of the first one. He then stood up for a long time but shorter than the first, then again performed a long bowing which was shorter than the first and then prostrated for a shorter while than that of the first prostration. Then he finished the prayer and delivered the sermon and said what Allah wished, and ordered the people to seek refuge with Allah from the punishment of the grave.
Sahih al-Bukhari 1057. Narrated Abu Mas'udi.
Allah's Messenger said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's death or life, but they are two signs amongst the signs of Allah, so pray whenever you see them."
Sahih al-Bukhari 1058. Narrated Aisha.
In the lifetime of the Prophet, the sun eclipsed and the Prophet, p.b.u.h, stood up to offer the prayer with the people and recited a long recitation, then he performed a prolonged bowing, and then lifted his head and recited a prolonged recitation which was shorter than the first. Then he performed a prolonged bowing which was shorter than the first and then lifted his head and performed 2 prostrations.
He then stood up for the second rak'ah and offered it like the first.
Then he stood up and said, "The sun and the moon do not eclipse because of someone's life or death, but they are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah which he shows to his worshippers. So whenever you see them, make haste for the prayer."
Sahih al-Bukhari 1059. Narrated Abu Musa.
The sun eclipsed and the Prophet got up, being afraid that it might be the hour, i.e. day of judgment. He went to the mosque and offered the prayer with the longest qiyam, bowing and prostration that I had ever seen him doing. Then he said, "These signs which Allah sends do not occur because of the life or death of somebody, but Allah makes his worshippers afraid by them. So when you see anything thereof, proceed to remember Allah, invoke him and ask for his forgiveness."
Sahih al-Bukhari 1060. Narrated al-Mughira bin Shu'bah.
On the day of Ibrahim's death, the sun eclipsed and the people said that the eclipse was due to the death of Abraham, the son of the Prophet.
Allah's Messenger said, "The sun and the moon are 2 signs amongst the signs of Allah. They do not eclipse because of someone's death or life. So when you see them, invoke Allah and pray till the eclipse is clear."